you to the ID for creating this platform for such a creative and interdisciplinary debate. For me, my engagement in biotechnology is itself a leap in interdisciplinarity, because I'm actually trained as a quantum physicist and did my PhD in a very esoteric subject on non-locality in quantum theory. But part of what quantum theory teaches you is the old model of the world as a machine, of things with immutable, unchanging quality, is just not true. The world is in constant dynamic transformation and relationship. And our knowledge is always burdened with uncertainty, the very famous Heisenberg uncertainty principle. I was forced to start looking at agriculture in 1984, because that is the year we had the emergence of extremist violence in the state of Punjab, which is the land where the Green Revolution was introduced, and the Green Revolution is the name given to introducing chemicals to agriculture. It was the same year we had the worst industrial disaster of the world in the city of Bhopal, 2nd of December, when a gas leaked from a pesticide plant and killed 3,000 people. Over the years, 30,000 died in Bhopal, 30,000 were killed in Punjab. And I was forced to ask myself, why is there so much violence related to the production of food? And so I started studies, research, did a book called The Violence of the Green Revolution, and was thrown into discussions of the emerging biotechnology. Commercially, we only got biotechnology crops in the late 90s. But the discussions were already there in the 80s. And I remember three things from that period. The first, they were talking about miracles, growing food on the moon, on toxic dumps, in the Sahara and the desert. There never being food scarcity ever again. The second was the discussion around monopoly, wanting to own the seed. The companies that had brought the chemicals now wanted to control the seed. And the way they wanted to control the seed was genetically modify seeds, and then say we've created something new, we are the inventors, therefore we are the owners of seed through intellectual property and patents. These laws were even brought into the WTO, the World Trade Organization. I remember in discussions during the Uruguay round of GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, which led to the WTO. Monsanto, some of you might know, it's my very favorite company in the world. A representative said we've been the patient, the diagnostician, and the physician all in one. We defined a problem, and the problem they were defining was that farmers save seeds. Because if farmers save seeds, then they can't sell their seeds. And the solution was make it a crime, an intellectual property crime, for farmers to save seeds by turning seed into intellectual property. So for me, biotechnology came associated with patterns on life. Now, life is not an invention. Life is. Life makes itself. Life is absolutely the result of self-organization of living systems. And self-organizing systems are autonomous and self-referential. But this does not mean they're isolated from the environment. They're interacting with the environment, but on their terms. The living system specifies its own structural changes and which patterns in the environment will trigger them. A new science has emerged related to this knowledge of the behavior of living systems, their genetic behavior, and the larger environment. It's called epigenetics. A self-organizing system knows what it has to import and export in order to maintain and renew itself. Living systems are also highly complex. The complexity of their structures allows for self-ordering and self-organization. It also allows for the emergence of new properties. Can you imagine how a little acorn grows into a giant oak tree? Or a little fetus? Each of you were one at one time in the beginning of your life. Is the distinctive you with all your uniqueness and all your complexity. Living systems are also diverse because since they are self-organized, each articulates in a unique way. So unique that India had 200,000 rice varieties, 1,500 mango varieties, 1,500 banana varieties. That's the kind of diversity I have grown up with. It's actually a dwarf variety, I think from Taiwan, if I'm not wrong, that became the basis of the Green Revolution, to be able to redesign crops, to be able to withstand more chemicals. The redesigning of biotechnology is different because it transforms at the genetic level by introducing genes from unrelated organisms through a technique that was evolved by scientists in the early 70s, the technique called recombinant DNA. The scientists who did this work got together in a conference center in Asilomar in California and said, we are transforming life at such a fundamental level, we need to understand the implications of this transformation before going ahead. But meantime, the companies ran to Wall Street and the tools were already public, but they patented the tools of moving genes across species boundaries, and then onwards we have the story of genetic engineering. Genetic engineering is often referred to as biotechnology, but when you refer to biotechnology, you're talking about life. Bio means life, and technology means any technology of transforming life. The interesting thing is, in the early days of the United Nations, and I was very involved in those debates of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the companies would say, oh, this is exactly like grandmothers made cheese and yogurt. And of course we know it's not grandmother's cheese and yogurt, because when you put a gene from a soil organism called Bacillus thuringiensis into a plant, first, that gene to produce toxin did not exist in that plant before, and now the plant is its own pesticide factory. Secondly, that gene expresses itself very differently in a plant from a bacteria, and yet we have a very false assumption, the so-called substantial equivalence, pretend that a genetically engineered crop is the same as a non-genetically engineered crop. But it's not. And that's where the scientific blindness comes into the picture. And that's what's created work for people like me. I have no business to be looking at all this. But when there's a vacuum, you have to fill it. Especially when it's an issue of the impact on life itself. The impact of food, the impact of livelihoods of our farmers. The second application, after all these years, is putting genes to express resistance to a toxin, and each company puts a gene that resists its own proprietary herbicide. So Monsanto puts herbicide-resistant genes. Bayer will put Liberty-Link genes. Each of BASF will have its own. But the most popular is glyphosate, which is Roundup. The brand name is Roundup. So one, compared to the story of the beginning, where we could do anything with these tools, we only really have two commercial crops, herbicide-resistant and Bt-toxic crops. And they have, of course, redesigned the seed and the crop and the food resulting from it, all the way from the genetic level to the organism level to the ecosystem level. And this has implications. My understanding, after nearly 3 decades of the study of genetically engineered organisms and their impact, is there is a lack of fit between the design of living systems in their diversity, complexity, self-organization, and the design of genetically engineered organisms. The basic difference arises from the fact that while the design of living systems is based on diversity, self-organization, cooperation, mutuality, give and take, and what I call open source. You've just had a discussion on internet issues. And the issue of open source is so vital when we talk of the democracy of the internet. But open source is even more vital when we talk of the democracy of life, because open source seeds can be saved. Whereas seeds that have either been genetically engineered to not reproduce, like the Terminator seed, which is made sterile, or patented seeds which are legally prevented from being saved, blocks open source. It transforms the commons and makes what was common a private individual property. Genetic engineering, as the word engineering suggests, is an extrapolation of a mechanical view of the world, which even in physics we know does not work. But to extend it to living systems, where living systems are definitely not mechanical systems, creates all the misfitting and the ill-fitting and the lack of fit between a designed organism through genetic engineering and the design of ecosystems and living organisms. The first difference is that these systems must be monocultures. If you're going to spray Roundup, and Roundup will kill everything green, then the only crop you can grow is a Roundup-resistant soya or a Roundup-resistant corn. You must have a monoculture. So if you go to Argentina today, it's one large green desert of Roundup-ready soya with Roundup sprayed from the skies. No woman can grow a kitchen garden and vegetables. There's only GM soya. Or if you go to the Amazon, the forests are being chopped down also to grow Roundup-ready soya. Or you go to the Midwest of the United States, the bare prairie belt, Iowa, Ohio, miles and miles and miles of just soya, and then miles and miles and miles of corn. We used to eat 8,500 plant varieties. We are now trading in 8 commodities and genetically engineered crops, which are the fastest acreage that is spreading, is only 4 crops: corn, soya, canola, and cotton. The second thing with genetic engineering, as with the chemical green revolution, is its dependence on external inputs. If you're going to grow crops with chemical fertilizers, and then they'll get pests and you're going to spray them with chemical pesticides, or you have Roundup resistant crops which must be sprayed with Roundup, what you have is a huge increase in the use of external inputs, which must have two absolutely inevitable effects. One is ecological, and this is pollution. The pollution due to the chemicals themselves, but also the pollution due to the genetic engineering, because pollen transfer doesn't know. The bees don't know this is a genetically modified crop. They pick up the pollen and transfer it to a non-GM crop, and you've lost the non-GM crop forever. Organic farmers are losing their status on a very fast rate. A canola farmer in Australia, 3 corn farmers I just met in Italy. The entire Spain, farmers have given up organic farming in corn because the contamination is so high. But besides pollution is the issue of debt. Farmers have limited resources. When you sell them patented seed, you sell them more and more chemicals, they must get into debt. And the most tragic example of this indebtedness is my country, India. We're a country of small farmers. We've deliberately stayed a country of small farmers because people like Gandhi said freedom lies in villages. So 70% of India lives in villages. 80% of our rural communities own less than 2 hectares of land. When Monsanto comes with its BT cotton, its genetically engineered BT cotton, first it has amazing advertisement. It is, of course, a design. They mobilize all the gods, and in India, everything is a god. A blade of grass is a god, a tree is a god, a seed is a god, a cow is a god, the river is a god, a mountain is a god. So you can mobilize lots of free salesmen, 300 million. And they've been used very effectively. And then, of course, you've got this crazy program on TV called How to Become a Millionaire. So there's millionaire sales, you'll be a millionaire. The tragedy is, first, that the cost of the seed is so high. And the agents of the company say, oh, just put your thumbprint on your land letter, ownership, and we give you a credit against your land. The seed costs jumped 8,000%, from 5 rupees to 4,000 rupees a kilogram. And even though the seed was supposed to control pests because it had a pesticide built into it, the pest bollworm became resistant because nature has its own design. And new pests emerged. 12 times more in China than there used to be before. And in India, farmers are using 13 times more pesticides on a pesticide plant that was supposed to have no pests. The advertising was saying you'll never have to touch a pesticide again. High pesticide costs, high seed costs means debt. And the farmers know they can't pay this debt back. It's the day the agents come and say, sorry, you owe us 200,000 rupees. The land is now my land. That's the day the farmer will go quietly to his field, because the farmers have such an intimate bond with their land. They'll go to their field and quietly drink pesticide to end their lives. Now, all this started in the late 70s, when the seed companies were allowed to enter India because of globalization, and they couldn't be stopped. 2 years ago, the figure had crossed 200,000 farm suicides according to official data. And on the rate at which it's increasing, even though the official data hasn't been released, but we look at the trends on the ground level, and on that basis, we have lost 250,000 of our farmers to suicide. A tragedy that's totally avoidable. Because when we distribute seed through Navdanya and we help farmers go organic, farmers earn between 2 to 5 times more. They don't have a debt, the seed is their own, they don't have to purchase external inputs, and they produce high quality food and fiber, for which they can earn much more. Another quality of the design of genetically engineered food and farming systems is competition. Crops compete with each other, farmers compete with each other, countries compete with each other. And competition for farmers and producers means prices go down, which means they lose even more of their income. Exploitation and privatization of the commons and ownership of life. Of course, ownership of life is such a wrong step, because you can change a gene, but you don't create the plant. This stool has been brought for me to sit in. Suppose I had carried it from India, and I came into the International Convention Center of Taiwan and said, because I brought a stool, the center is my center, IDA should be giving me rent for holding this conference, and TICC should be paying me rent. You would laugh and say I'm crazy. But where it comes to life and food, we've allowed this craziness to happen. All that was done was a gene was introduced, and ownership over the life of a plant and its future generations was taken away. And now, not only has the stool mover been turned into the owner of a building, they've even been turned into the architects of the building. So someone who moves a gene through genetic engineering has a patent, and the patent means they've created that system from scratch and are the owners and can collect rents from life, which is what patent royalties really are. And that's why from day one, I said, this is wrong. This is epistemologically wrong, it's ethically wrong, it's ecologically wrong. And I started to save seeds. That is what Navdanya does. And we distribute seeds to farmers to keep seeds in the commons. We've distributed seeds after the tsunami because we had the seeds of salt-tolerant crops. We've distributed seeds when the drought hits us, of crops that can tolerate the drought. And we have wonderful aromatic rices, like our basmati. Not only have I challenged patents on life morally, I've challenged them legally, because patents on life also mean the most blatant pirates can start claiming ownership over other people's knowledge and biodiversity. We have a wonderful plant called the neem, which was patented by the US Department of Agriculture and a company called W.R. Grace. I fought that case for 11 years in the European Patent Office, and we defeated a big company and the biggest superpower of our world. Basmati, the valley that I come from, produces this aromatic rice, wonderful, it means the queen of aroma. A Texas company called Rice Tech, and they think you just put tech against anything and it's yours. And they claimed basmati was their invention, nothing less than an invention. And they claimed ownership over the aroma of the rice, the plant, the seeds, the methods of cooking rice, can you imagine? We all learn how to cook rice as little children in rice-eating cultures. We challenged that, and we won. More recently, Monsanto patented an old wheat variety, which has no gluten. We challenged that. But I don't think it should be our job to stop piracy. Piracy should not happen, and it can only stop when patents on life and stealing knowledge is treated and defined as illegitimate in international law, and these processes are on in WTO, but they don't get completed. Of course, there's a very very big consequence when the design of living systems and the design of genetically modifying living systems doesn't fit. It leads to failed technology. So the Roundup-resistant soya was supposed to control weeds. The Bt toxin crops were supposed to control pests. What we have is an increase of weeds. So we have super weeds and we have super pests. 15 million acres in the United States have been destroyed with super weeds. I mentioned a 13-fold increase in pesticide use in India. Another claim was this is going to produce more food, but that's not true. The technology doesn't allow it. But even more importantly, empirically, across the world, not a single genetically modified crop has produced more yield. So it's not a solution to hunger, it's not a solution to reducing chemical use, it's not an environmental solution, but it is an environmental problem. That is why we have to design food and agriculture in more intelligent ways. Better intelligent that takes into account the ecological processes of living systems. Agroecology is the discipline that works on the design of ecological farming. And we produce more food. The United Nations has admitted that you can produce 2 times more food through agroecology. An international assessment of agricultural science and technology, a United Nations assessment, is the climate treaty equivalent of food and agriculture, has shown clearly that only agroecological processes can introduce better food security. So we have on the one side a paradigm that destroys the earth, biodiversity, farmers, public health, and creates monopolies. And on the other hand, the richness of biodiversity, working with our intelligence, of sharing the resources of biodiversity as a commons, doubling food production, tripling food production, while conserving the natural capital for future generations. It would be stupid to go the unintelligent way.